the day and just snap pictures with my phone, so I can figure out what. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength is too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. As is our custom, if you'd like to come and light a candle for whatever personal or private reason, please do so while we sit in stillness listening to the prelude.
Donando peace, pacem, pacem. Donando peace, pacem. 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 Donando peace, pacem. Donando peace, pacem. Donando peace, pacem.
Please stand in body or spirit for our chalice lighting and spoken affirmation. Paul Stephen Dodenhoff brings us our chalice lighting. For this 1 hour, Spirit of life, we let go. For this 1 hour, may we let go of our anxieties, our fears, our anger, our self-doubt, our regrets, our petty grievances, and our distractions. If only for this 1 hour, let the flame of this chalice burn them from our hearts and minds and light our way to peace and serenity for this one holy hour. Join me as together we remind ourselves of the affirmation that is a cornerstone of our free faith tradition. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. You may be seated. This weekend, is Memorial Day weekend. I can't think of a better way of remembering our fallen defenders than in learning more about leaders in peace. Today is our 6th Sunday, continuing our look at Great Peacemakers, true stories from around the world. One of our peace leaders this morning is well known, the other not quite as much. We hope you enjoy learning more about these two leaders this morning. Much of the dialogue about these leaders is taken directly from the book. Barely escaping the Holocaust, Dr. Riane Eisler asked herself, quote, "How can human beings be so brutal to their own kind? What is it that chronically tilts us towards cruelty rather than kindness, towards war rather than peace, toward destruction rather than actualization?" The answer, she discovered, was society's habit of choosing domination over partnership. Explained in her best-selling book, The Chalice and the Blade, Eisler's findings are revolutionary in their power to alleviate a vast array of social problems. In 1931, Riane Eisler was born in Vienna, Austria, to affluent Jewish parents who gave their only child a carefree childhood. Sadly, her untroubled days came to a screeching halt one night in 1938. A night known as Crystal Night, because so much glass and crystal were shattered in Jewish homes and synagogues. That night, suddenly, a gang of Nazis banged on the Eisler's front door yelling "Gestapo" and burst into their home, shoving her father down the stairs and dragging him away. Courageously, Eisler's mother followed them to Gestapo headquarters, where she paid to get her husband back. After that night, young Eisler knew that she was no longer safe in her country, remembering, quote, "Overnight, the hunting and the killing of Jews had become legal in Austria. I went from being a little girl who people on the street patted on the head to being an enemy of the state," unquote. Running for their lives, 7-year-old Eisler and her parents managed to flee to one of the only places that was accepting Austrian refugees, Cuba. From overhearing her parents' whispered conversations, young Eisler learned that she and her parents had barely escaped the Holocaust. Discovering that most of her close relatives were among the 6 million Jews murdered in this unthinkable tragedy, Eisler vowed to do something significant with her life to justify that she had been spared. 7 years later, in 1945, Riane and her parents emigrated to the U.S., initially arriving in Florida and ultimately settling in California. Experiencing the pros and cons of Austria, Cuba, and the U.S., Eisler gained 2 valuable insights. Quote, "I learned that what people consider just the way things are is different in different places. And I learned that not every cultural tradition should be preserved. We should ask if a cultural tradition promotes cruelty and abuse or caring and respect," unquote. After earning a degree in sociology, Eisler married and had 2 daughters and began living a typical suburban life. Unfortunately, she and her husband were ill-suited and for each other and divorced. The determined single mother raised her daughters while earning a doctoral degree in law and then working as a family attorney and women's rights activist. During this time, Eisler pushed herself so hard she became seriously ill. Her illness prompted her to make major changes to her diet and lifestyle, to give up practicing law, and decide what to do with the rest of her life. She said, quote, "There was a time when I didn't even want to think of all the injustice, violence, and suffering in our world. I told myself that there was nothing I could do about it anyway, and it was too overwhelming. My personal life was more than enough for me to deal with. Then I began to realize that many of my personal problems were connected with social problems, and that whether I liked it or not, I had to address both," unquote. Trading the courtroom for the library, Eisler embarked on a 10-year quest to answer profound questions that were rooted in her experiences as a child in Nazi Austria and had haunted her for years. Questions such as, why do we hunt and persecute each other? Studying over 30,000 years of Western history and research of scholars in anthropology, archaeology, sociology, and other academic fields, Eisler made a profound discovery. Two opposing models for molding and organizing relationships, which she called the domination model and the partnership model. These models transcend familiar categories, such as capitalist or communist, religious or secular, Eastern or Western, technologically advanced or primitive, and they shape the very essence of a society. Looking at some of the most brutally violent and repressive societies of the 20th century, Hitler's Germany, which is a rightist society, Stalin's USSR, a leftist society, Khomeini's Iran, a religious society, and Idi Amin's Uganda, a tribalist society. Eisler saw that despite obvious differences, these societies all shared the same dominator blueprint based on ranking and domination. From Eisler's perspective, quote, "One core element of this dominator blueprint is authoritarianism, strongman rule in both the family and the state or tribe. A second is rigid male dominance, the ranking of one half of humanity over the other half. A third is socially accepted violence, from child and wife beating to chronic warfare. A fourth core element is a set of teachings and beliefs that dominator relationships are inevitable, even moral, that it's honorable and moral to kill and enslave neighboring nations or tribe, that stone women to death, stand by while inferior races are put in ovens and gassed, or beat children to impose one's will," unquote. On the other hand, partnership cultures are based on linking instead of ranking and exhibit democratic social and family structures, gender equality, and low levels of violence. Eisler emphasizes that partnership cultures are not entirely flat societies in which everyone does whatever they want to do. Partnership cultures have hierarchies and clear lines of responsibility, but they are characterized by mutual aid rather than intimidation or force. Partnership cultures do not have competition, but rather than being partnership cultures do have competition, but rather than being cutthroat, it is achievement-oriented. Modern cultures close to the partnership model include present-day Scandinavian nations, which, although not perfect, have pioneered the first peace academies, laws against child beating, and social policies that support caregiving and environmentally sound manufacturing processes. These nations, Eisler points out, quote, are regularly at the top of the UN National Quality of Life charts. These more partnership-oriented societies offer living proof that a more peaceful and equitable way of life is possible, unquote. Eisler reported this research in her book, The Chalice and the Blade, which was published in 1987 and quickly became an international bestseller. The book has been translated into 22 different languages and was praised by Los Angeles Weekly as the most significant work published in our lifetimes. The book is now in 57 US printings and 27 foreign editions. The book's success was mirrored in Eisler's personal life as she married social psychologist and futurist David Loy, and together they started the Center for Partnership Studies. Referring to their partnership-oriented marriage, Eisler beamed, quote, I speak from experience when I say partnership works, unquote. One focus of the Center for Partnership Studies, now called Center for Partnership Systems, is applying the partnership model to the field of education. Eisler's system of partnership education incorporates nonviolent conflict resolution, multiculturalism, gender balance, ethics, and environmental sensitivity to all subjects and school policies, thereby offering students what she calls, quote, an experiential education in democracy. We owe it to them through partnership education to give them a more complete, more accurate, and yes, more hopeful picture of what being human can mean, unquote. Another aspect of Eisler's work is the important connection between violence in the home and violence in the world. She declares, quote, intimate violence and international violence are as tightly bound together as the fingers of a clenched fist, unquote. From her perspective, intimate violence such as child abuse, rape, and spousal abuse damaged not only the direct victims, but also society as a whole. Eisler explains, quote, the UN reports that violence against women and children is the most widespread human rights violations worldwide. The ranking of male over female is a basic model children learn early on for equating differences with superiority and inferiority, which is then generalized to different races, religions, and ethnicities, unquote. Eisler also notes that when children are abused or see their mothers being abused, they learn that it is acceptable for those who are stronger to impose their will through violence. In addition, experiencing or witnessing such abuse causes the children's brains to develop fight or flight or disassociation patterns, putting them at greater risk for violent behavior later in life. Quote, no one is born an abusive person. No child is born a terrorist. Intimate violence is a school for violence, and we don't have to continue to have these schools, unquote. To spotlight this issue, Eisler co-founded with Nobel Peace Laureate Betty Williams the Spiritual Alliance to End Intimate Violence, called SAIV, whose mission is to stop intimate violence, the training ground for violence of war, terrorism, and political repression and crime. Members of the council include such dignitaries as Ella Gandhi, Deepak Chopra, Jane Goodall. Desmond Tutu was on the council until his death in 2021. Riane Eisler received the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's Distinguished Peace Leadership Award in 2009. She is the current president of the Center for Partnership Systems editor-in-chief of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies, and distinguished professor at Meridian University, which offers PhD and master degrees based on Eisler's partnership domination social scale. She lost her second husband, David Loy, in January 2022 to COVID. From carefree child to enemy of the state to best-selling author and scholar, Dr. Riane Eisler has transformed personal tragedy into social benefit, offering a new understanding of humanity's past, renewed hope for its potential future, a future when, in Eisler's words, quote, chronic violence, inequality, and insensitivity will no longer be just the way things are, but the way things once were. We will now see a short video of Riane and a few more famous quotes, and then we'll be followed by a song. And this song is one that people say they don't know, so we're going to make sure in the next few months that you learn this song called Spirit of Life.
Take, for example, the commonly used economic indicators, which are used by policymakers. Gross domestic product, GDP, gross national product, GNP. Now, if actually, objectively speaking, if the consequences weren't so serious, these would be funny. Because, consider, what is included as productive work, as these are measures, by the way, of economic fitness, they say, economic health. They include activities that actually harm and take life. Making cigarettes, the health bills, medical bills, the funeral bills are terrific for GDP. Not only do they include as positives negatives, but they fail to include as economically productive work the most essential human activities, without which none of us would be here, the life-sustaining activities. The work of caring and caregiving in households, it isn't included. Not only that, the life-sustaining activities of nature aren't there either. The only value that an old stand of trees has is when it's cut. But the fact that we wouldn't be having air to breathe without these old trees, it doesn't figure in. So obviously, we need to change. And by the way, some people are going to say, well, how can you quantify this? You can quantify it to a very large extent. I'll give you one example, the Swiss, which is not exactly the most radical society in the world. They have for years been doing satellite accounts in which they have been measuring the value of the work, the unpaid work in households, mostly, as I said, this women's work. And they found that if that work were included, it would amount to 70%, 70% of the reported Swiss GDP. So obviously, we've got to change things. And we've got to really change them. Not only, we need an economic model that includes the household economy, that includes the natural economy, as well as just the market economy. But even in the market economy, what we see is bizarre. In these United States, for example, people think nothing. Well, see, the professions that don't entail caring and caregiving, engineering, plumbing, uniformly are higher paid than those that do, like childcare, elementary school teaching. That doesn't mean that caring men, it's usually men, aren't plumbers or engineers, but the work of caring and caregiving isn't. So people think nothing of paying a plumber, the person to whom we entrust our pipes, $50 to $90 an hour. But the person to whom we entrust our children, the child care workers, according to the US Department of Statistics, an average of $10 an hour and no benefits. And we insist that the plumber be trained. How could we entrust our pipes to someone who isn't? But we do not insist that all child care workers be trained. So obviously this is not logical, it's pathological.
set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
We're going to be doing a meditation today, and you have a part in this meditation. Every time I gesture like this, I would like you to read the words on the screen. So let's try that. Thank you. All right. Our meditation words this morning are by Mohandas Gandhi. If someone with courage and vision can rise to lead in nonviolent action, the winter of despair can, in the twinkling of an eye, be turned into the summer of hope. It's possible to live in peace. Nonviolence is not a garment to put on and off at will. Its seat is in the heart, and it must be an inseparable part of our being. It is possible to live in peace. Nonviolence, which is a quality of the heart, cannot come by an appeal to the brain. It is a plant of slow growth, growing imperceptibly, but surely. It is possible to live in peace. If a single person achieves the highest kind of love, it will be sufficient to neutralize the hate of millions. It is possible to live in peace. If we are to reach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children. It is possible to live in peace. The future depends on what we do in the present. It is possible to live in peace. Join me for a moment of silence to contemplate these words. It is possible to live in peace. His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, describes himself as only an ordinary human being, but his millions of admirers around the world would surely beg to differ. The spiritual and political leader of 6 million Tibetans, the Dalai Lama is also one of today's foremost proponents of nonviolence. His message of compassion has earned him the Nobel Peace Prize and made this jovial monk an unusual kind of international celebrity. In the fabled land of Shangri-La, high atop the Himalayan mountains, Lamo Dandrab was born in 1935 to peasant farmers in Taxer, Tibet. 2 years later, a group of monks visited his parents' small farmhouse and identified him as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama, the spiritual and political leader of Tibet, revered in Tibetan Buddhism as a manifestation of the Bodhisattva, or the enlightened being, of compassion. Surprised yet pleased, the farmers watched as monks escorted the boy from their humble home to the immense Potala Palace in Tibet's capital, Lhasa, where he was renamed Tenzin Gyatso, meaning Ocean of Wisdom. At just 4 years old, the somewhat bewildered child monk found himself wrapped in crimson-colored robes and in an elaborate ceremony officially enthroned as Dalai Lama. He later remembered, quote, "As a child, for the most part, I was quite unhappy. I did not understand what it meant to be Dalai Lama," unquote. Between intense tutoring sessions by elder monks, the young Dalai Lama learned one of his most salient lessons from an unlikely source: a parrot living in the palace garden. Wishing to befriend this bird, the young Dalai Lama tried to play with it. But when it did not respond in kind, he punished it with a stick, only to find that from then on, the bird fled at the very sight of him. Quote, "This was a very good lesson in how to make friends, not by force, but by compassion," unquote. The monk would strive to put this lesson into practice for the rest of his life, even in the face of an all-out invasion of his country. A Buddhist theocracy devoted to producing enlightened beings, Tibet represented a stark contrast to the atheistic beliefs of neighboring communist China. Claiming to want to free and modernize Tibet in 1949, 80,000 Chinese soldiers invaded this peace-loving country. With a population less than 1/100th of China's, Tibet tried in vain to defend itself, and the Dalai Lama was called upon to assume full political authority. He recollected, quote, "I found myself undisputed leader of 6 million people facing the threat of a full-scale war, and I was still only 15 years old," unquote. Consistent with his Buddhist belief in nonviolence, for 9 long years, the Dalai Lama attempted to negotiate with China's chairman Mao Zedong to a little avail. A movement among some Tibetans to resist the invasion met a brutal response. According to a report by the International Commission of Jesuits, China tried to squelch the resistance through horrific methods such as beheading, burning, crucifixion, vivisection, burying alive, and tearing out prisoners' tongues to prevent them from voicing support for the Dalai Lama. In 1959, approximately 30,000 Tibetans gathered in a massive demonstration in Lhasa, hoping to protect their beloved leader, and calling for China to leave Tibet. Worried that Chinese troops would open fire on the crowd, the Dalai Lama, with a heavy heart, decided that there was only one thing he could do to make the crowd disperse: leave the country. In the darkness of night, he disguised himself as a soldier and, with an inconspicuous group of advisors, sneaked out of Lhasa. Quote, "For the first time in my life, I was truly afraid, not so much for myself, but for the millions of people who put their faith in me. If I was caught, all would be lost," unquote. After an arduous 2-week trek through desolate mountain terrain, the Dalai Lama and his advisors found asylum in India, settling in the northern town of Dharamshala. In the years to come, thousands of Tibetans would also risk their lives and make this dangerous journey to freedom. Soon after the Dalai Lama's exile to India, the International Commission of Jurists publicly declared that China, quote, "had violated 16 articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and was guilty of genocide in Tibet," unquote. Hearing this, the Dalai Lama immediately embarked upon a global quest for international assistance and eventually welcomed 3 resolutions in the United Nations General Assembly appealing to China to respect Tibetan human rights. The Dalai Lama stated, quote, "I do not consider those who support our cause to be pro-Tibet. Instead, I consider them to be pro-justice," unquote. When in India, the Dalai Lama saw to the needs of his fellow exiles by establishing systems for rehabilitation, education, and cultural preservation. On the governmental front, he drafted a democratic constitution for a future Tibet, including a clause for his own impeachment if necessary, and proposed a 5-point peace plan for reconciliation with China. Staunchly and consistently, the Dalai Lama denounced the use of violence. Quote, "Violence begets violence, and violence means only one thing: suffering. I have no hatred towards them. The Chinese people have suffered too. Even the ones who are doing these terrible things to Tibet are suffering. There are more than 1 billion Chinese, and whilst maybe several thousand are participating in acts of cruelty at any one point, I believe there must be several million performing acts of kindness," unquote. Such extraordinary dedication to nonviolence and compassion brought the Dalai Lama the 1989 Nobel Peace Prize. Accepting it, he expressed solidarity with Chinese students killed earlier that year in the Tiananmen Square massacre, who he said, quote, "showed the Chinese leadership and the world the human face of that great nation," unquote. Sadly, conditions in Tibet remain dire. More than 1 million Tibetans have died as a result of China's policies, and over 70% of the survivors live in poverty. Tibet's natural environment has also been degraded, being used by China for the extraction of natural resources and the dumping of nuclear waste. Furthermore, international security has become compromised because whereas Tibet previously served as a buffer between China and India, China's stationing of at least 250,000 troops and its believed placement of several dozen nuclear warheads in Tibet has increased tension between China and India, the world's most populous nations. In order to raise international awareness of his country's plight, the Dalai Lama continues traveling worldwide, meeting with heads of state, celebrities, and ordinary citizens alike. Promoting peace in the world as a whole, he shares, quote, "So while as Dalai Lama I have a special responsibility to Tibetans, as a human being, I have a much larger responsibility toward the whole human family, which indeed we all have. No matter what part of the world we come from, we are all basically the same human beings. We all seek happiness and try to avoid suffering," unquote. To the Dalai Lama, a key to peace is the development of compassion, which he defines as the wish for another being to be free from suffering. In speech after speech and book after book, the Dalai Lama emphasizes the importance of compassion, declaring, quote, "Compassion and love are not mere luxuries. As the source of both inner and external peace, they are fundamental to the continued survival of our species," unquote. Events such as the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the apartheid in South Africa strengthened the Dalai Lama's certainty in the power of compassion and his confidence that, in the end, freedom and justice will prevail. As a result of his uplifting message, his global travels, and 2 major motion pictures about him, 7 Years in Tibet and Kundun, the Dalai Lama has become known worldwide. Acknowledging that fame brings with it a risk of arrogance. The Dalai Lama keeps his ego in check by remembering his shortcomings. With a chuckle, he quips, quote, "I am a rather lazy Dalai Lama, the lazy Tenzin Gyatso. Unquote. Such candor and humor enhance the Dalai Lama's charm and appeal to legions of admirers worldwide. His warm smile and jolly laugh convey his sense of compassion for and kinship with all people, be they Tibetan, Chinese, or any nationality. Quote, "We all share an identical need for love, and on the basis of this commonality, it is possible to feel that anybody we meet in whatever circumstances is a brother or a sister," unquote. Still full of life in his senior years, the Dalai Lama occasionally ponders the conclusion of his life. Quote, "Within less than 50 years, I, Tenzin Gyatso, the Buddhist monk, will be no more than a memory. If when our final day comes, we are able to look back and see that we have lived full, productive, and meaningful lives, that will at least be some comfort. If we cannot, we may be very sad. But which of these we experience is up to us," unquote. One of today's most illustrious living peacemakers, the Dalai Lama serves as a beacon of hope to millions of people throughout the world. Through his words and actions, his luminary demonstrates what it means to live a compassionate life. We will now see a short video of the Dalai Lama and a few more famous quotes, followed by the song, and the song will be "Love Makes a Bridge."
My question is to His Holiness and Your Holiness. How do you control your anger in your daily life? Thank you.
When I got angry, shouting. Oh, I think I have one sort of story. 1950, I think around 56, 57, 58. Say, I used the old car which belongs to 13th Dalai Lama. So sometimes you see that car broken. So then one driver who come from Kalimpong, from India, you see, who drive. So one day some sort of damage under the car. So he sort of repairing. No? So while he repairing, his head somehow hit, bang. So then he lost his temper. Then further bang, 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 bang. What use that? The very reason he lost temper is something hit. Then further hit by himself is foolish. I think you see, so I think many cases, firstly, you see, you develop some sort of unhappiness. Right? Okay. So, when anger develops, then think, what is the causes? And then also think, what will be the result of angry face, shouting? Then you will realize, too much anger. Now medical scientists, they say, constant anger, constant hatred, and also fear. Fear, where there is fear, there is also the frustration will come. Frustration brings anger. So you see, fear, anger, something very close. So therefore, constant fear, constant anger, hatred, actually eating our immune system. So you see, everybody, you see, taking care about our health. So, in order to have healthy body, healthy mind, that means calm mind, is very important. So, anger is destroyer of calm mind. So, thinking these lines, then you realize, you get some kind of conviction, or anger is no use. Instead of sort of solving problem, it creates more problem. Then continuously thinking these lines, then eventually that kind of thinking become habit of your own mind. So that's the way to reduce anger.
Love makes a bridge from heart to heart and hand to hand. Love finds a way when laws are blind and freedom banned. Love breaks the walls of language, gender, class, and age. Love gives us wings to slip the bars of every cage. Love lifts the hopes that force and fear have beaten down. Love breaks the chains and gives us strength to stand our ground. Love rings the bells of wanted birth and wedding day. Love guides the hands that promise more than words can say. Love makes a bridge that winds may shake, yet not destroy. Love carries faith through life and death to endless joy.
Arthur Foote II reminds us, freely have we received of gifts that minister to our needs of body and spirit. Gladly we bring to our church and its wide concerns a portion of this bounty. The bowl awaits, or you may donate online. I invite you to stand in body or spirit for the benediction and extinguishing the chalice. Be ye lamps unto yourselves. Be your own confidence. Hold to the truth within yourselves as to the only lamp. Go in peace to be peace. Please join me in saying the words to extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. You may be seated.